In this video, we're going to talk about the top 15 mistakes you cannot do as a 3D printing beginner. Just kidding, of course. Making mistakes is how we all learn. But hopefully after watching this video, you can learn from my mistakes instead of having to do them all by your own. And we're going to start right away with not freaking out when it comes to your build plate being damaged after just a couple of days or maybe just hours of use. This is completely normal, and this is just for the nozzle to clean itself. On all these printers behind me here, for example on the Bambu Lab A1, it does have a dedicated cleaning area which is a little bit more coarse nozzle printing, and then the printer actually uses this area here for some more fine nozzle printing, and this area is not included in the overall build plate volume, so please don't freak out if you do see some damages on your build plate, because this is completely normal. Something else that sadly is just as normal is to completely forget to wash your build plate regularly, which is something that is recommended by, for example, Bambu Lab and all other manufacturers as well. There are tons of different guides online on how you exactly should clean your build plate and what different kinds of materials you should or should not use. I haven't been able to find the exact definition of regularly, but in my case I do it on a somewhat weekly basis, or when I do realize that my build plate has lost the adhesive, which for example happens if I do accidentally touch the build plate, which you absolutely should not do under any circumstances if you can prevent it. Sometimes if you do use the scraper, you might accidentally bump into it with your wrist or with the rest of your arm, and then you will realize next time that your next print may be not adhering to the build plate, or just have a little bit worse quality on the first layer that you might be used to. And that is the next point, and the next mistake that I see a lot of people making is to not pay attention to the first layer, because 99% of the case, if your print will have some issues, you will be able to see that quite easily after maybe the first 1 or 2 layers, because if it doesn't stick properly, it is the first layer that will not stick properly. But this was also something that I found a little bit difficult, at least like the first couple of days, just to know what is a good and what is a not so good first layer. And there are some illustrations on, for example, Bambu Lab's website. Not something that I recommend doing every single time before you start a print, but you could also print out this entire I think they're called build plate cleanings, because these prints also work to actually clean up some kind of residue you might have, or if you do have some leftovers from another failed print, for example, you can just print one very thin sheet of, for example, PLA in this case, and then you can also very easily see which parts look different than the rest of your build plate. So it is very easy to see the differences if you do print out an entire build plate, but it might be a little tricky to see if you're only printing something small on just one specific area. And we can also see that this very much corresponds with where I would normally put my thumb in order to just bend the plate slightly in order to get all the prints coming out from the actual plate. So as a general rule of thumb, no pun intended, I do tend to just limit my prints to being as much in the middle as possible, because it's least likely that I would accidentally touch that area with my thumb. The next mistake is when maybe you are feeling confident enough printing some PLA, so you want to maybe take the next step and start to print some PETG or some other materials with your printer, and then you completely forget to dry your filament before you start using it. And this is something that is more common with PETG or ABS or ASA or some other more advanced filaments, but if you do have some kind of special PLA, for example a glitter PLA, or in my case I have some translucent or glow-in-the-dark PLA, there will be a very big difference before and after you have actually dried the filament. In my case, since we are preparing for Halloween here in the studio, this kind of stringing on this specific ghost print did turn out quite well and quite fitting actually. So maybe that's a small hack you can do if you are doing some prints for Halloween, which of course I'm gonna make a dedicated video about very soon here on the channel. But yeah, maybe this was just a bad example example to show this issue, but in general, you don't want this kind of stringing on your prints. And in this case, this has nothing to do with if your build plate is dirty or not. And in addition to these kind of stringings, you will have all kinds of different issues as well. For example, you would have some oozing or just some extra filament being added to your print for like it appears to be no reason whatsoever. But this is because if it is some humidity in your filament, then when that goes out through the 220 degrees Celsius nozzle, the water would just like vaporize or just like start bubbling, which will then either just push out more filaments that you did not attend to, or will just cause some other kind of irregularities or just some non-smooth surfaces on your print. And speaking about drying the filament, at least when I started, I had some difficulties understanding the differences between drying your filament and keeping your filament dry. So if you do want to actually dry your filament, you do need a pretty much dedicated filament dryer. And then after you have actively dried your filament, it's also very important to keep the filament dry, which you are doing with the help of desiccants or these silica gels. In my case, behind me right here, I do have tons of different AMSs, which I also have some desiccants inside, which are keeping all the filaments relatively dry, ideally below 20% in my case. Next mistake on my list may not really be a mistake per se, but it is that I did not trust any kind of third-party brands when it came to filaments or some other 3D printing accessories. This video is not sponsored by any of these brands, but I have been working with all these brands and they have provided all these products to me for free. But I just want to share that I have had some other products provided to me for free as well, which I'm not going to mention in this video. Hopefully that is just the proof that you need that I think that these products are absolutely amazing and to some extent even better than the products that you can get from Bambu Lab directly. First of all, the BQ Cryo Grip plates. I've been using them for anything from Bambu Lab A1 to the H2D, and these are absolutely amazing. And I will actually go so far and saying that these are much better than the included PEI build plate from Bambu Lab, simply just because these provide a little bit better grip. So if you are printing some specifically taller prints, then it is preferred to have a little bit better grip on your build plate. And the only reason for why I would be continuing using this is just to show that in 95% of the cases this works perfectly, so you don't have to upgrade. But the cryo grip plates are just better than the included plates. And speaking about third-party products for 3D printing, we of course have tons of different third-party filament brands as well. For example, behind me right here, I do have a lot of Sunlu spools at the moment, since I've been using them quite a lot recently, mainly because they've been so kind of sending me all these spools for free, so I can continue making these videos for you guys. So moving on to some actual mistakes now. One of the most common mistakes that at least I made in the beginning was that very quickly removing and bending the plate before the actual print had cooled down. And although you technically, I think, can do it without damaging the actual build plate, you might actually warp the prints that you have if it's still hot and you do actually end up bending the plate a little bit in order to remove the print. So just make sure that both yourself and the build plate cool down a little bit, just like a minute or two outside of the printer before you try to remove the prints from the build plate. And speaking about removing things, something that is very easily done, and I know that firsthand because I have done so myself, and I have received countless of comments telling me how incredibly wrong I was, which I'm super grateful for. And I thought that this silicone sock is there to protect me from the heat of the nozzle. So during one of my earlier videos, when I was just super frustrating, could not get my 0.2mm nozzle to work at all, I just ended up switching nozzles like all the time. But it turns out that just as much as this sock is protecting me from the warm nozzle, it is also protecting the warm nozzle from all other kinds of external variables, such as if you have the fan going on, hitting the nozzle, or any other kinds of temperature shifts in your room. Please do make sure to put back that silicone sock, especially if you are trying and playing around with the settings, doing some A/B testing, because you do want to have all other variables as fixed as they possibly can. Another mistake that I'm seeing a little bit too often on social media or online is how to actually refill an empty Bambu Lab spool. There are instructions for this. There are very clear, I think, step-by-step instructions. It is just a lot of people try to do this without reading the instructions. And instead of me just sitting here going through everything step-by-step, I'm just gonna link the instructions down in the description. And halfway down to that description box, we also have the subscribe button, which I would highly appreciate if you do click to show your support and to help me reach a larger audience and to help even more 3D printing beginners. But we're not done with this video yet, but for the remaining parts, I think I need to switch seats and actually show you some other tips and tricks and some other mistakes you should avoid in Bambu Studio. Now, this first thing might actually not be related to Bambu Studio, but to 3D design, and also will help you in Bambu Studio as well, I think. And that is to get a proper mouse with 3 buttons, or this scrollable, clickable wheel in the middle. If you do go and visit, I think every 3D printer first 3D design experience, Tinkercad, which if you have not tried it out yet, it's absolutely amazing to get started with 3D printing. It is very surprisingly easy to use, but also surprisingly useful. In Tinkercad, if we do click with the left mouse button and we move left to right, then we're simply highlighting whatever we have here on this build plate. If we are clicking the right mouse button, then we are spinning around the axis here. And if we are clicking the middle scroll wheel, then we are doing the panning left and right. And of course, you can just scroll up and down as well. If we are doing it in comparison here with my now magic mouse, it is not so magic anymore. You can actually just hold shift and the right mouse button and go left and right to do this panning as well. But as things are getting a little bit more complicated in both Tinkercad, but also some other like more advanced 3D design softwares, for example, Fusion 360 or Shaper 3D, which I personally really recommend as well, although they don't want to sponsor my channel. Moving on, if you watch my previous videos, you should already know all my top 10 tips and tricks when it comes to Bambu Studio. For example, if you do right click on an item, you can press fill bed with copies, and then you do have your build plate filled with copies of what you want to print. But something that I still just forget when I just want to maximize my build plate to start a print like right away before I head out and do something else is the menu up here, where you can actually auto-rotate for arrangement that will actually give you a little bit more space to fill up, hopefully, even more items on this build plate. But one thing that took me way too long time to realize as well is that, well, I mean, this is quite obvious right now, but this build plate is obviously not optimized. It is not filled to the max. And the reason for this, I discovered, is that Bambu Studio just filled the build plate trying to keep all the items as similar as possible. So like most of them are always lined up in like the same orientation, although you do have the auto rotate for arrangement. It really wants you to print as much as possible as similar as possible, just to prevent so the nozzle doesn't bump into one of your other prints, for example. And it's very rare then if I do use the shortcut R here to like rotate, for example, you would not see prints being placed like this, although this is like 100% possible. As I mentioned, I'm currently busy planning my Halloween top 10 must print prints, and spoiler alert, this Grim Reaper cloak is definitely one of the coolest Halloween designs I found on MakerWorld, but more about that in my next video, so you can stay tuned for that and subscribe if you haven't already. But one of the things we're going to talk about today is something that I see so often on Facebook groups for some reason, and that is a lot of people asking, how do we get rid of these white lines that are just ruining the rest of this print here? Short answer, you don't have to worry about this at all if this is something that you see, and if you have actually done a print first, then you already know that this is nothing you need to worry about at all. If you go into this menu right here, we do have the slicing results, and this is an extremely useful menu. You have all the different kinds of information, and these seams are just showing basically where each layer starts and finishes, because just how the way of these 3D printing works, like the FDM 3D printer works, are that they have to stop and start somewhere on each and every line. And you can actually control and somewhat kind of design where these seams are gonna be as well. So if you do think that these seem to affect the quality of your print, you can actually improve that if you want. We are gonna go in here and we're gonna search for seam. And we do have seam position, which is here under quality. I never learn under which category all these different things are. So I just go in here and I just know that it's called seam. I just search and then you click on it and you also see like it starts to blink a little bit just to give you a little bit of highlight of where this is. So what we just saw right now is the aligned version. And I think this is the default one. And most of the time it just works great. It just tries to align all these seam positions as much as possible without making it too distracting. But depending on the kind of print that you're making, in this case it's a figurine, it's something that's most likely going to be like on a shelf, and you would most of the time only see one side of it. For prints like these, we can actually change the seam to the back, and then we just go to slice the plate again. And what will happen is that it will then take all the seams and put alongside the back of the print. So the back will not look as great as it was before, but the front, that I assume is going to be the one that you will look at most of the time, will not have any seams at all. So if you are a little bit bothered by this, just go in here, change the seam position to back. Next mistake that at least I do quite a lot as well, and I think this is just because I do jump a little bit between Bambu Lab A1 and Bambu Lab X1C printers. That is specifically on X1C. My issue right now is that I can just print the plate. There's no error message whatsoever, which is like the only thing I look at when I want to go ahead and print something. But for some reason, the default setting is that this calibration extrusion line, I can put things on this line without it telling me like an error message that you should like check this before you start printing. Now obviously there are some settings in Bambu Studio we can adjust to fix this, and they're all found here under the arrange menu, and then we can click on avoid extrusion calibration region, which will then move away these Taiwan flags in this case from this extrusion calibration region. But this is also where Bambu Studio is not as smart as I was hoping it would to be, because obviously what I would want to do is to just move these down a little bit. Maybe if needed we can also move this flag down a little bit here, and now there's no error messages. We can of course just print this right away, no issues whatsoever. But if you do have a situation like this, when you have some items over this extrusion region, you go in here and you want Bambu Studio to arrange this, then it just decides that you cannot fit everything here on this plate again, and it creates you another plate with just like one extra Taiwan flag in this case. So this is just one of these things that, first of all, just avoid putting anything on here, but also know that there are ways you can just rearrange this manually, and don't just trust Bambu Studio. It is amazing and it's great for beginners, but now you have been subscribing to my channel for quite some time, so now we're already past that first little beginner level, and now we're trying to just utilize Bambu Studio to its fullest, and then we do need to do a little bit more things manually just to maximize the efficiency and the printing volumes on these different plates. Another mistake that we talked about previously here on the channel, but for any new subscribers, since this seems to be the most commonly reoccurring issue on any kind of social media platform, that is when it comes to color bleeding, or you do have some other colors being in places where they should not be. It is super easy to fix. You just go in here under the flushing volumes, and then you can just select the amount of filament that will be purged out and cleaning the nozzle in between different color switches. 99% of the time you just click recalculate, and then Bambu Studio will recalculate and it will show you the exact amount of filament that needs to be flushed out just to make sure that you do get a clean print. If you, for example, want to go from red to white, you need 577, whereas if you're going from white to red, you only need 283. But for that 1% of the time, if you do have one specifically stubborn print and you just want to get it over with, you can just go in here. Say, for example, we do have an issue if you are going from red to white. Well, we see here from red to white. Okay, instead of 577, we just max that out with 900, which is the maximum flushing volume in this case. And then we are almost guaranteed to have an absolutely perfect print. And last but not least, the 15th most common mistake for 3D printing beginners is to not subscribe to my YouTube channel. I was supposed to have a lot talk about supports and how to change the support settings, how to maximize the support settings, but I decided that I should just have a dedicated video talking about basically the entire support section in Bambu Studio, because it just ended up being so much, if I can say it myself, valuable information. So that would be on a separate dedicated video very soon here on the channel. So please do remember to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and if you want to learn anything regarding Bambu Studio or just 3D printing in general. And of course, please also let me know what exact questions you might have regarding 3D printing. I just started this journey myself, so I definitely do not have all the answers right away, but I would love to learn for myself, and also hopefully teaching you a thing or two when it comes to improving our 3D printing capabilities. Thank you all so much for watching. My name is Lucas. Starts with L as in like, ends with S as in subscribe. Please do both, and see you all in the next one.